Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. It's me, Daniel, here, joined at the desk by the angry dentist to my leftover Halloween candy, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh man, I do need to probably go see a dentist after the haul that we've collected over the weekend. So.
Yeah, and that is one. We both have young children, and it is one of the blessings about having young kids at Halloween time. Is I have two 6-year-old twin boys, and they're both kind of wondering why they went to bed and came back from school, and all their Sour Patch Kids are just gone, vanished. What kind of Halloween magic is going on? But yes, so we have need to hit the exercise.
What happened to all the peanut M&Ms?
Yeah, I thought we had more Reese's Buttercups than that. But so Halloween, we talked about that last week, just sort of how to navigate Halloween.
And I feel like we should start off with an apology, actually, from last week, because we did it and talked about Halloween, but none of us thought to dress up for last week's show, and I feel like we missed a huge opportunity there. So we apologize. Next year we vow to do better.
Yeah, we will go all in with I'll have a Bruce the Shark costume, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, thanks for joining us. If you haven't joined us before, this is our weekly live stream where we look at what's going on in pop culture, the different issues or questions, and just kind of dialogue back and forth about what is sort of the Christian approach. What does the Bible kind of give us guidance on how to, engage with media and just be present in the culture that we are in. And there's always lots to talk about, always a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah. A couple of things I'm excited to talk about this week, some kind of main topic stuff. But before we get into the main topics, we start off with our first segment, Pop Culture News. So, whoa, boy, this was a big week for a lot of stuff. All the studios, I guess, got together and decided, hey, this is trailer week. Let's release all this new stuff.
Yeah.
I guess kind of gearing up for the big kind of end of the year winter push. So I'm going to run through these sort of stories, kind of go quick so I don't get bogged down in it, and then we can kind of talk about any of these stuff that stands out. Probably the biggest one, at least to me, but probably the biggest story is the Book of Boba Fett, the kind of spin-off for The Mandalorian, released its first trailer, which looks interesting. It's a total Star Wars gangster movie, so sign me up. The most reluctant convert, this is actually tomorrow. I think it's a one night only in theaters, and I'm not sure exactly how you will watch this after. But this is a story about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, kind of his conversion story. Obviously it's a lot of apologetics and kind of a faith-based sort of film. But it's only in theaters tomorrow. Obviously, you'll be able to probably stream it somewhere. But again, as a C.S. Lewis guy and a Tolkien buff, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that. Morbius, I don't know if you were familiar that this was even coming out. This is Jared Leto. It's kind of like in the vein of like Venom. He's a Spider-Man villain. He looks like he's just like a vampire or something. But they just released the first trailer for that. Wheel of Time, show I'm very much looking forward to, released its first trailer. Dune Part 2, we talked about a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, where we just sort of geeked out about Dune, saying, is there going to be a second part? And there is, probably to the surprise of no one. That was announced that they will be coming out with Part 2 and maybe even Part 3, so they are all on board. The Sandworm for that. The Eternals, the new MCU movie, comes out on Friday. What else do we have? Chris Pratt, he's already...
The voice of Mario.
The voice of Mario, now the voice of Garfield. Everyone's grumpy. Kind of my spirit animal is a grumpy cat that just likes to eat Italian food. So it doesn't seem like he's a very Garfield type person, but we need more Garfield in the world. But those are probably just the main stories or stuff going on in pop culture. Anything of that excite you?
Yeah, obviously the Book of Boba Fett, a lot of it does. That I saw the trailer for that, and it looks really fascinating. Very much in the vein of The Mandalorian, so that's just exciting. So
yeah, kind of
more of that.
I was telling me and my brother we're geeking out and talking about this through text, and it almost looks like it's like an expansion of like what The Mandalorian started as, like this real underbelly kind of gritty.
Yeah. And
then because as that show went on pretty quick, he became like a very lovable, noble, good guy, and a kind of a more traditional Star Wars story. But this is more like The Godfather, just in a Star Wars world. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, Wheel of Time. I've been getting excited about that show. There's been the hype building, making my wife get excited. I think there's a couple weeks until that comes up. But yeah, a lot of movies, which means we'll be doing a lot of reviews and dialoguing with that. But let us know what you guys are excited about coming up in pop culture. And kind of speaking of, hype and movies and just exciting properties. Again, Dune is still the number one movie in the box office, still kind of riding that wave. A lot of people talking about it. And one of the things, if you checked out the review we had here at the Collision, which I hope you did, kind of got into a bit about part of what that makes that story of Dune kind of interesting is the way that it sort of wrestles and kind of explores like the Messiah, kind of Christ figure, kind of that, some of that like savior role, and kind of unpack some of that with Paul's character, so that we can sort of just talk about that, because we've mentioned sort of the Christ figure, and you hear that thrown out a lot. In kind of people talking about movies, and like everyone's a Christ. Harry Potter's a Christ figure, Luke's a Christ figure, Paul's a Christ figure. It's a common kind of literary cinematic thing. So that we kind of talk about, what is the Christ figure, and what do we kind of do as Christians? Like, what do we take from that? Is it a good thing? Is it something we should be concerned about? And I thought I would just before we dialogue about this, I pulled from our beloved scholarly resource of Wikipedia. This is to try and get some kind of quick definition of this. And it says, a Christ figure, also known as a Christ image, is a literary technique that the author uses to draw allusions between their characters and the biblical Jesus. More loosely, the Christ figure is a spiritual or prophetic character who parallels Jesus or other spiritual or prophetic figures. So that's what Wikipedia tells us it is. And again, that is the gist of what it is. But so what do you take from this? Like the whole idea of like a Christ figure, like.
Well, I feel like in some ways a lot of shows or books or movies will have like, I feel like oftentimes the main character ends up being kind of a Christ figure, or like there's just maybe some hangover from that, like maybe not so much like in the prophetic or spiritual sense, but it's always like it's the person who's got to like sacrifice himself or herself to save broader humanity. And so I just feel like there are undertones under any sort of like action movie, especially like there seems to always be, and maybe not always, but oftentimes there seems that there's just some figure that you latch on to. It's going to have to put up a huge sacrifice, but it's for the greater good. And, they're just this really great person or individual. And so I feel like it ends up being a motif often, and I think it's because people want to relate to that person in some way, and so it ends up being sort of a fallback, I think, for a lot of action movies.
Yeah, and even if and obviously part of the reason it's so prominent, I think sometimes it is intentional. The author, the director is trying to draw like a parallel. But even like an atheist who doesn't necessarily believe in the reality of Jesus or the divinity of Jesus, like the person, the character, the biblical character of Jesus, is kind of like the ideal for he's loving, he's self-sacrificing. Yeah. Like he sort of represents all that is good in a character. So it makes sense that like when you're coming up with heroes and when you're trying to make like a good character, any of the really good traits end up kind of reflecting Jesus, like sacrificing.
It's almost by definition, like if you're gonna like what's a really good like leading character here that's like embodies all the great qualities that we as a society love, and it just is, by default it's going to end up being sort of a Christ figure.
Yeah, and so here's and we can kind of go back and forth on this. Again, if you guys are watching, we'd love to hear what you guys think of the sort of that motif of that Christ figure. And I'm kind of two minds on this. The one side, it's like, I think it's good. It's, hey, anytime we're reminding people about kind of what Jesus did and sort of this, who Jesus is, and, attributing any kind of good action and, act and sacrifice in cinema or literature, like, anytime we're attributing, that's like Jesus. He was all loving. He was self-sacrificing. It is a good theme to wrestle with and just to kind of have as like an image out there. So that's my kind of the positive side. The more kind of cranky, cynical side of me is that oftentimes it seems like it becomes like almost like a game of like Where's Waldo, where it doesn't, it's so easy, or it's so broad that like anything is, that's a Christ figure because he sacrificed himself, and it's, well, maybe, but like, what does that tell us about Christ? Like, is anything else about his character consistent with Christ? Like, is it just sort of our way of like, well, this must be a Christian story then, because there's a character that sacrificed himself.
Well, yeah, it's like, I feel better about watching this movie now that there's a Christ figure in it, and it's like, well, that was a terrible movie. Like, I do. I don't know. Again, I think it kind of goes back to that, we want shortcuts for things and sort of shorthand for the things that we can, appreciate or agree on or like in pop culture. And so I think it ends up being sort of like, oh, well, to sort of, I don't know, maybe feel relevant or to kind of say that, hey, look, Christianity has a broader impact. We just kind of end up going to those sort of shortcuts, which is like, oh, the Christ figure, like, you can't escape us. Even in your crazy, horrible film, you still have to, you can't get anywhere without a Christ figure. And so, yeah, I do think it can, at least for Christians when they're interacting with these movies, that can be sort of just this check the box type of thing. Like
it's definitely like the low hanging fruit of kind of engaging with cinema. And that, Paul in Dune is a perfect example for that, because, you have on the very surface, hey, he's a Christ-like figure, he's a Messiah kind of figure, but kind of going any bit beyond the surface, like, a lot of what the story is doing is deconstructing the Messiah figure and kind of making it a little more ominous and not quite as clear cut. And, it's sort of like resisting the traditional Christ figure. But you want to get that if it's, hey, this is sort of like a Christian story because Paul is going to be a prophesized Messiah. And so for me, I think it's good to have those figures. And there's lots of story, like Tale of Two Cities, even in literature, is very famous kind of Christ figure. And it's a super powerful ending of the book. So those moments can be really powerful. But again, it does become sort of like this sort of quickly, sprinkle some water and baptize this film as, any film that has, now it's Christian. And it's almost like if you just stop there, then you're not really, it's not making you think differently, or it's not challenging your beliefs or really strengthening them. It's just sort of like a check the box, like, hey, found the Christ figure.
Well, and I think that's the thing is, and a lot of what we try to do at the Collision is kind of go beneath the surface. And I think this is another one of those areas where it's like, oh, well, it's not rated R, so let's go watch it. It's like, well, the rating system is a way to determine what movies you want to watch, but it's simply that, like, it's not a perfect system. And so I think we're always looking for these sort of systems to say, oh, well, this is, okay to watch, or like, yeah, I can get behind this movie or that movie. Oh, there's a Christ figure. It's like, well, yeah, if you kind of scratch beneath the surface, there's actually a lot more to it. And I think what ends up happening is you kind of lose some of the nuance when you just kind of go straight to your, oh, it's a Christ figure. It's like, yeah, well, let's unpack that some. And I think you can have greater conversations with people. Maybe that's the entry point, but there's a lot more going on, I think, in a lot of these movies. But it's just, I think it's tough sometimes for Christians to want to go beyond just oh yeah, that has a Christ figure in it, or oh yeah, whatever it is. Like, there's so many other ways that I think like Christian values can show up that aren't as obvious, and I think that's also something that's pretty interesting. Yeah, you kind of overlooked.
You kind of miss like kind of some of what a film can do, like the ways it can really move you or make you think or challenge you. Yeah. If you just stop at kind of like hey, this is sort of like this sort of represents the tribes of Israel, and this is sort of a Moses. And like if you're just sort of trying to like make it reflect the Bible on like a plot kind of character wise, then you miss a lot of the stuff that the film really has to offer. But let us know what you think of that, the Christ figure, and maybe some of the ones that you've noticed in your favorite movies and stuff that have stood out as powerful, or maybe sort of a more messy Paul Atreides Christ figure. We'd love to hear that. So our next thing. Speaking of deep, going deep into some real rich material, we have Host Corner. So this is my week to share, something that's important to me, and I would hope is important to all of us as a people, as a human race, and that is something that we probably don't talk about. I know I talk about it, but probably just as a collective society don't talk enough about. And that is dragons. And I actually, I even have a prop this week. This might look like one of my kids' toys, but I took this from my own bookshelf. So I wanted to talk about dragons and kind of give a little more of diversity of dragons and make sure that all species of dragons are properly represented. So if we have that timer, we can throw that up. So dragons, one of the things about dragons is that sort of anything that sort of looks like a lizard that maybe has wings and probably breathes things out of its mouth, we think of as a dragon. Everything is a dragon. And we end up calling a lot of things that aren't technically dragons, dragons. We sort of just lump them all together. So here's a couple, this kind of tidbit or guidelines for how to recognize these different species of dragons. This here, as you can see, is a legit dragon. It has 4 legs and 2 wings, often very large. A lot of times what you see people call a dragon is actually a wyvern. That is a dragon that has 2 legs and they use their wings as the other 2 limbs, which is actually a Smaug in the Hobbit movies. Is technically not a dragon. He is a wyvern. A worm, that is WRM worm, is a dragon that has no wings and no legs. And a drake, fire-breathing drake, ice drake, is a dragon that has no wings but has 4 appendages. So those are, and there's a helpful little picture there, the different subcategories of dragons. So before we quickly just label in our society, we're too quick to label people, label things. Make sure that you're not calling a wyvern a dragon or a dragon a wyvern, because words matter. So that is my...
Well, that's it's the education I never knew I needed, Daniel, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to, educate us.
Yeah, I hope,
us mere
I
mortals.
hope some of you aren't feeling guilty about all those years you have spent.
I've got some wyverns I need to apologize to.
Yeah, that Drake, and just because he doesn't have wings, he's already self-conscious that he doesn't have wings, and you're still calling him a dragon. So that is my...
the more you know. That's the takeaway here, folks.
Yeah, it's like the old Bill Nye thing. Now you know. But something that is equally, if not more important, is approaching films from a biblical perspective and a Christian perspective. And for a second, I'll leave my little friend here while we talk about this. So the second topic was kind of inspired by. It's actually something I've written on before. We've sort of talked about it, but maybe not as directly. But it kind of was reminded of it with a comment we got on one of our videos. And it's just the idea of sort of what do you do when a film isn't quote unquote biblical? Like when it has, in the thumbnail of this video, I threw Yoda up there, the Force. What do you do with these films that kind of reflect or showcase a world that is not consistent with what we know of the Bible, whether that's spiritual things? And this is part of we get a lot of really great comments on the collision videos, and we get some that aren't happy with what we do. Again, you're free to have an opinion. But this is part of a comment that actually it was posted in our Dune review. So I thought we'd kind of talk about, because it sort of reflects kind of this mindset. And it says, this movie is full of witchcraft / occultism and not for Christians. I'd question any Christian's discernment if they said otherwise. And then the comment went on, shared some more stuff, but just sort of that.
Are you saying that they're questioning your discernment?
Yeah. So my discernment has been called into question. I've had my salvation called into question. Comment sections are always a lot of fun. And again, this isn't. I'm fine with opinions. I don't delete comments like that. So this isn't like I need to push back against the comments in our comment section. But I think it does just touch on something that is.
I think a lot of people have that idea when it comes to film, and so I don't think it's an uncommon sort of mode of approaching film.
Yeah, just like, sort of like, hey, if this has, and obviously the spiritual stuff tends to be kind of the highest level of that. Yeah. And understandably, Christians get a little squeamish about that. So that's valid. But this idea that, like, hey, this is a movie, and it has like spiritual, like in Dune, it has the Bene Gesserit, and they're kind of like these witches, this society of like superpowered, kind of mentally they've developed to the point where they can, control people with their voice, and they have kind of these powers, which is obviously not what the Bible teaches about, and the Bible says we should stay away from that kind of stuff. So what do we do about that? Like, what do we, is it, are we lacking discernment if we're watching these movies that like Star Wars and the Force or some of these other stories, or like, is it deeper than that? Like, what do you think about?
Yeah, again, I think it comes back to the stories that are being told, and I think for a lot of it, it's like if it's fantasy, that's one thing, because I don't think people call into question like Chronicles of Narnia. Like, I think people who take this approach to watching films, I don't think they would question like Chronicles of Narnia or Lord of the Rings, for example. And there's a lot of like, special powers and stuff happening that's not strictly biblical. And so I think it just sort of I think what people really get uptight about is maybe the source material. And so like, well, since C.S. Lewis wrote, these stories, it's okay, and he was doing it as an allegory or whatever, but this person was, an atheist, and they wrote Dune and using all these sort of witchcrafty things, like that's not okay. But I think it comes down to like, what is the story that's being told, and like, is it okay to use sort of supernatural things in stories? And I think, yeah, it is okay to do that, and I think it's fine to do that in movies. I think maybe where you get into trouble is if you're making a horror film about the occult or something that's like based in like our reality, and it's obviously not like a sci-fi movie that's just a total fantasy. I think that is maybe what you might want to be a little more discerning when you're approaching those types of films. Whereas like with fantasy, it's like, well, it's fantasy, like it's a story, like it's a, I don't know.
Yeah, I think some maybe the way that I kind of think about it is like the sort of the alternative. Then, like if it's, hey, well, this movie has anything that sort of isn't consistent with the Bible, if we just sort of, exclude all of that from the options of what we're as Christians is acceptable to watch, like what does that leave you with? Like, is it just films that are kind of these faith-based, either about biblical stories, like Moses in the Ten Commandment movie, or like a faith-based sort of like War Room, or kind of movies like that? I guess. Yeah. I guess maybe another way to frame the discussion is just like, is it possible to have a movie and say, as a Christian, that is not biblical, but still watch and engage with the film? Or is it like even exposing yourself to this kind of non-biblical worldview and framework, even if it's based in reality or purely fantasy, like is that in itself a sinful, wrong action? Or can you do both, as far as like, hey, no, that's obviously the Force isn't a biblical view of spirituality, but Star Wars has a lot of great stuff. I enjoy the movie, and I kind of can distinguish what's kind of biblical and what's not. Like, yeah,
I think entertainment trips up a lot of people, because I think football isn't biblical, like, so I think you can go down that it's like, well, sports isn't, you can say that's not biblical or whatever, and so you just sort of like, well, where does that take you, that mindset? And I think most people who would maybe make comments like that, like the one you read, are likely not being consistent across the board. Like they're drawing the line somewhere, and I think it just ends up being sort of this inconsistency with what you watch or don't watch. But I do think, like you said, I think it is possible to say, like, I'm not watching this because it's biblical or because it isn't biblical. It's like there's something interesting here. There's a story that's fascinating, or some understanding of culture, or it's entertaining in some way that is not sinful, but can be helpful for you as growth as a person and make you a better Christian ultimately, or however you want to see it. And I think you can do that, and it's not necessarily like, all the things that you do in your entertainment choices. Like, it's not like, well, I don't see where they got this from the Bible, so I'm not going to watch it. And if you can do that. It's just, you're not going to end up watching stuff, and then you can go down the track of, well, I'm only going to watch biblical stuff. Yeah, well, okay. How biblical are the biblical films that, how biblical has been her? Like, you're just going to put that on repeat, and it's like, sure, it's a Bible story, but like, how true are they to the, so like, you can just,
and like, in a lot of ways, it sort of becomes almost like a very kind of legalistic framework of like, well, the Bible says that this is wrong or a sin, therefore, like any depiction, if you're even around people, or a movie where people are hey, these two characters are living together, like, there's all these different things. It's like, is that wrong? And I think there is a distinction between like a movie that's just like filled with like gratuitous nudity and stuff, like, like experiencing that is not just like, well, I know it's not biblical, but because there is that engagement where you are you are engaging in like a sinful activity. It's sort of shaping your mind, like, so there is like kind of content wise, I think there I know I've strict kind of rules and stuff about that. But it's the idea that like Christians can't ever be exposed to like a way of thinking that's not biblical. I'm an avid reader. I read tons and tons of books. Very little books, or very few books that are written by Christians. I love this classic literature. I love a bunch of these authors and stuff that were writing from a worldview that doesn't reflect my own worldview. That we're oftentimes kind of criticizing my own worldview, but they're doing it in a great story, and like it makes me kind of understand the other perspective. It makes me reevaluate my own beliefs. And like there's so much value I get out of beyond. A lot of times like with a Christian, some of these stories like all they're doing is just sort of affirming what I already believe. They're not growing me. They're just sort of like, hey, this is your team. This is prayer's good. Oh, I know prayer's good. Like all that kind of stuff. Where I find that I get more kind of edified or challenged by going outside of that, and that's kind of where it comes down for me. Like there is, like you're saying, some horror. Like there are things that as Christians you don't want to like celebrate necessarily. Some of these things or really glorify, like the occult and any of that kind of stuff. But just sort of that like base level of hey, if this is anything that's not consistent with the Bible, then like you cannot get anywhere near that. Turn the TV off. I just think it's too simplistic of and I don't think because you can take that mindset even just to like real life as far as like well hey, this group of people you're with, they're speaking blasphemy or something. They're not a bunch of these sinners. Like does that mean you don't ever hang out with people that
don't share your worldview,
that don't talk kind of church language? Like if you're a missionary, you go to like China or something, or you go to some country and they have different kind of traditional belief systems and stuff. Like does that mean you just like run away from that? Like there's I think a lot of the stuff that we kind of make legalistic in the Bible ends up being more of like like I think of like Paul, like whatever is noble and lovely and pure, like dwell on those things. He's not saying like don't ever be exposed to any other things that aren't pure and lovely. He's just saying like what defines you and kind of guides you, let it be the Bible and the pure things.
And again, I think this sort of maybe touches on a bit of our first topic too. It's just that we're always seeking these sort of shorthands for things, and so making it legalistic, it's like, well, if you determine a line that you're saying, well, I'm not going to watch anything that contains whatever, then it's sort of a legalistic shorthand to sort of, rather than think about these things, you're just kind of, whether it's like the Christ figure thing or the R rating or whatever, it's like you just make up these things and decide that this is how you're going to approach your entertainment, and that's fine, but it just I think sort of excludes you from a lot of the conversation around, I think, really important conversations in culture, and I think it can help you grow if you're exposed to different worldviews, and like you said, it I think it shores up your own and makes you question your own, and I think you can grow from that. But I think when you sort of unduly sort of garden yourself off to these other ideas, then you just end up, I think, just being more shallow in your own view, and I think I don't think it helps you in the long run.
Yeah, and some of it too is just like a balance. Like I think is being exposed. If you're watching a movie that has kind of represents a very maybe like a pantheistic or pagan or some kind of non-biblical spirituality, like does that just mean it's always wrong to? Well, not necessarily. At the same time, I don't think Christians should just be immersed, just saturated, and all they ever do is this dark, kind of Tim Burton aesthetic, like skull. Like I think there is, and that's even why I start every year by reading through the Lord of the Rings. One, because it's the best story ever told, next to the Bible, but also just because it represents such like a pure embodiment of my worldview, like the virtue and so much of the sort of my Christian faith is infused in that story. And so for me, it's just I read a bunch of other stuff. I read authors that don't reflect that it's just like. But I also want to make sure that I'm nurturing and exposing myself to my own to good stuff and not just sort of this secular stuff. But let us know how you kind of navigate. Obviously, it's a big topic, and there's lots of stuff that plays into that. But I do think as Christians, we need to be a little more, maybe a little less sort of legalistic and a little more kind of thoughtful and engaged, and actually kind of bringing the Bible with us, as we engage with films, and not just sort of expecting that Hollywood is, is going to give us these biblical stories.
Yeah.
I don't expect Hollywood to reflect my worldview, and they don't. Very rarely
Turns out.
do they. So I expect that going in, but it's just it is push to go a little deeper beyond just sort of that's not what the Apostle Paul wrote.
But yeah, it is a balance, and I think that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah, which just means all of us need to, like me, start every year by reading through the Lord of the Rings, and you'll be just fine. So this week at the Collision, unsure exactly what all we're going to be giving you. Like I said, the Eternals movie is coming out on Friday. I'm not going to be here. I'm heading out of town for the weekend, so I'm not sure when we will get a review for that movie. I'm planning to do one because I'm excited about that. It looks like a pretty cool MCU movie. So at some point, maybe not this week at the Collision, but in the future for the Collision, we'll have a review for the Eternals. I encourage you guys to check out, we talked about Dune in the show. Check out our reviews for Dune and some of the more kind of recent movies that have come up. And I encourage you guys, if you're just only watching us on Facebook or on YouTube, I encourage you guys check out our website, thecollision.org. We rewrite articles. We got a bunch of stuff. A lot of the reviews we do video-wise, we have written versions of those. So I encourage you guys to check that out. And our most recent articles actually getting a lot of traction, which is cool. This sort of on something I wrote about kind of what is the Christian alternative to this like tear down, not strictly like cancel culture, but just this mindset of just tearing people down and tearing things down and always kind of pulling things down. How can Christians kind of create and kind of build up in kind of contrast to that? So I wrote an article on that. So I'd love to hear what you guys think of that, and if you guys check that out. But anything for you? Final thoughts?
Just excited about. There's a lot of great stuff coming up, like the Wheel of Time and Boba Fett, the Book of Boba Fett. So
yeah,
about that.
And Christmas. Now we are past Halloween. We can start getting hyped up for. I know we have Thanksgiving before then, but really we're getting hyped up for Christmas.
It's all in service. So.
But thanks guys for joining us again. I hope you'll join us next week as well, and just sort of join with what we're doing here at the Collision. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to our channel, all the stuff you know to do as you go out throughout your week. Make sure you don't wrongly label dragons and wyverns. Be respectful about that. But most of all, guys, stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.